Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. This is the France 24 debate. We're asking, is it Qatar to the rescue after word that a plan that had been put on ice during the French presidential election campaign is now going forth. It's been confirmed by the industry ministry that it's near at hand, hasn't been signed yet, where Qatar will invest 50 million euros. French businesses will also help in those investments in poor working class suburbs of France. It's stirred a lot of debate, a lot of controversy. With us to talk about it, Ali Al-Ahmed, who runs the Institute for Gulf Affairs in Washington, Ardavan Amir Aslani, who's an attorney who travels often to the Gulf, David Roberts, Deputy Director of the Qatar Office of the Royal United Services Institute, and from Abu Dhabi, Elizabeth Dickinson of Emirates daily newspaper, The National. The news, Qatar, that investment, public relations, of course, playing a major role in it. They've done nothing to harm their public relations with the acquisition a little over a year ago of Paris football club Paris Saint-Germain. Their fortunes have turned literally since Nasser El Khalifi, a little more than a year ago, took over the reins. So far, they've spent more than 200 million euros. They've bought the likes of Sweden striker Zlatan Ibrahimovic, Brazil forward Thiago Silva, and David Roberts. I suppose it's the same as in Britain with Manchester City. If you're a PSG fan, you're delighted. Everyone else is gritting their teeth. What kind of just in terms of public relations, what kind of a return on investment is it when you do something like that?
Well, if you're going to buy a leading football club in Europe, at the moment at least, you're going to want it to be Paris Saint-Germain. It's the only major football club in Europe, one of Europe's capital cities, of course. It's in the Champions League. It's a potential money spinner there. And so the potential in Paris Saint-Germain is immense. But at the same time, of course, you need to make, eye-watering investments in players' salaries, signing fees and such. And so it's specifically in terms of the club, it's a questionable investment. But again, it comes along with other things. So we have Al Jazeera looking at the rights for the French to show French football, and
which
these
they've
kinds
bought.
of ideas. Well, exactly, indeed. And it's I suppose, an idea that's quite useful to think of, I think, in terms of Qatar, in terms of PSG, perhaps in terms of the acquisitions in the banlieue, these sorts of ideas. Is Qatar building and propagating a brand for itself? I mean, again, if you look back to Qatar's specific location, I mean, just up the road we have Abu Dhabi, we have Dubai and Manama. These are the sort of city-states, if you will. Now, they're intrinsically quite similar in terms of everyone's the same sort of language, similar families, similar religion, similar sort of economic background, these sorts of ideas. And therefore, if you're a state looking forward, if you're a state that is planning for a post-gas or a post-oil future, as Qatar most certainly is, it is explicitly planning for this kind of a future, indeed with its educational reforms, domestically at least, then, you want another string to your bow. You want something else to be a bit different about you. And so it's this sort of nebulous topic of a brand which Qatar is adding to. Sport is one part of it. Of course, as you mentioned, Abu Dhabi has, a sheikh in Abu Dhabi has the fingers in Manchester City as well. So that one's already kind of taken as well. But it's much wider than this. And the last thing I would say is that, we're talking about Qatar investing here and Qatar investing there. The PSG acquisition was done by, it wasn't even the Sovereign Wealth Fund, it was another section of Qatar under, I think it was perhaps the Crown Prince and his sort of particular monies there. So it's not, again, we just need a bit more nuance in this debate at times. It's not necessarily Qatar doing X or Y, but different people in Qatar, of course, undertaking different acquisitions.
It's 200 million euros, though. It's a lot of money for French football, at least. Elizabeth Dickinson, when you're writing about Qatar, or about its acquisitions in China, about everything it's doing, do you sometimes say to yourself they're boxing above their league? Again, we're talking about an emirate with less than 300,000 citizens.
Well, yeah, I think in many ways, one of the reasons that we have this visceral reaction to Qatar's investments might simply be because of that, because they seem to have come out of nowhere. It seems like, what are they up to? Where's all this money come from? And, I think for the Qataris, frankly, with this particular project, for example, in the French suburbs, they must be thinking, man, this, they just really have it out for us, because they've come in, they want to do social work. This is something that I think they clearly and honestly see as sort of contributing to a country that they think they have a very strong future partnership with, and that's France. So I think certainly we're right to ask questions about this, but I think that honestly, a lot of this investment really is sort of with the long view in mind, with building a relationship, with coming in and sort of, yes, what does Qatar have? What are Qatar's assets? It's a very small country. Well, it has a lot of cash, and what they can best do is leverage that in a way that they can build long-term goals, build long-term relationships, just as David was mentioning, in terms of, in the long term, when they run out of this flush cash, how are they going to have a place in the global society, where they have strong allies, relationships, markets, and I think that's really what they have in mind.
Yeah, we mentioned how sports is an important vector. The former France star Zinedine Zidane paid 11 million euros to support Qatar's winning bid for the 2022 World Cup. The son of UEFA president Michel Platini is an in-house attorney for Qatar Sports Investment. The law firm of Jacques Chirac's former prime minister, Dominique de Villepin, represents the interests of Qatar's sovereign fund in France, according to Le Point News Weekly. But again, all this with an eye to one day there won't be gas and oil. That's the point Elizabeth Dickinson was making. So fair play, why not?
I don't think all of it is for economic reasons. Buying, the football clubs is not really an economic investment. It is merely a narcissistic action by the Crown Prince, who owning a European Championship club. That is something that they could talk about with, this is as simple as that, with the Emiratis owning Manchester and Saudis owning other clubs. It is really money that they don't know what to do with, and they are buying failing or losing football clubs just so they can play against each other. And this is unfortunately the model of development that some Gulf countries have.
But hang on, Real Madrid operates at a huge loss. So does Barcelona.
Exactly.
So do most of the major clubs in Europe.
Exactly.
And those aren't owned by anybody from the Gulf.
Why would you spend that 200 million euros on a club that is losing? You're not doing it.
Vanity is not just the monopoly of one nation.
It's vanity, but you have issues. If you look at Bahrain, for example, a neighboring country that has a deep need for economic assistance. You have look at Yemen. So it's really an unfortunate situation where you have vanity superseding the need of children. There are about 1 million children in Yemen who are going hungry, and they need that money. I think they deserve it better than a football club in France.
David Roberts, your thoughts on this?
Well, the gentleman makes a good point in that, Qatar, as you mentioned, a country with less than 300,000 citizens, somewhere around 250,000, something like this, it's incredibly small. And the gentlemen who are in power, they have a lot of it. What they say goes. I mean, when we talk about Qatar's foreign policy more generally, and I talk about this quite a lot, I often say that, 2 or 3 men make the decisions. And I'm not really over-exaggerating when I say that, because that's the nature of it. And so if you have, the Crown Prince or whomever it may be, the Prime Minister, another important Qatari, if they want to do X, Y, or Z, then there's very little to stop them, to be honest.
Qatar itself, there are neighborhoods who are still shanty neighborhoods, especially from Al Ghufran tribe, about 5,000 to 10,000 people who are living without electricity or water or running water. So that's the thing I think the Qatari government should focus on before they can.
David Roberts, I just want to ask you about the point you just made about how the power is concentrated in just a few people's hands. We understand that from time to time there's big debates within Qatar about should they be playing such a high-profile role around the world, first in the years they've spent as mediators in various conflicts, and now with their active support the uprising, first in Libya, now in Syria?
I wouldn't necessarily there are big sort of public debates on these matters, but again, forgive me sort of repeating the point, but in such a small society, you know, the Emir or the Crown Prince, the gents in charge, they know perfectly well, I think, what the average Qatari thinks about one policy, be this intervening in Libya, be this intervening in Syria, or in Lebanon back in a couple of years ago. And so, whilst I certainly think it's fair to say that the elite are ahead in terms of they have a more globalized, slightly more liberalized in some ways attitude to various issues, I think they definitely realize that, you know, they might be pulling the majority of society along with them, if you see what I mean. But it's a direction in which society might be broadly willing to go in. I mean, there are going to be elections here next year. We'll wait to see how those pan out. But generally speaking, the elite here are extremely popular for obvious reasons.
Elizabeth Dickinson, why was there this point of sort of no return with the war in Libya, where suddenly Qatar took it one step further, you might say, in actively supporting those uprisings?
Well, I think, you know, as David mentioned, we'll never quite know exactly what went on in the back room that made those decisions. But at the end of the day, you know, I really think that the Qatar feels a very strong, I don't know if moral drive is maybe not the right way to put it, but I do think that they have a very strong conviction to see forward the Arab Spring, and particularly certain elements within the Arab Spring that they have built long relationships with. Usually, you know, we can sort of in broad strokes talk about their long-term relationship with the Muslim Brotherhood. In Libya, definitely the elements that they were supporting were directly linked with the Brotherhood. That's probably true in Tunisia and Egypt as well. It's sort of less clear in Syria, but it looks that way. But more broadly, you know, I think there are real questions to ask about that, about who Qatar's supporting, why they're doing it in the Arab Spring. But at the same time, when I talk to Qataris, I think that there is a very strong feeling that, you know, we are in this region, we happen to have a lot of cash, and these societies that are going through transition, we have the ability to help them economically. So, for example, in Egypt right now, where you see Qatar making a lot of investments, they signed a deal this week to sell Qatari natural gas to Egypt. I think things like that, you know, certainly there's an economic and a foreign policy motivation. I also, though, think that the Qataris themselves feel we're in this unique position to play a role in moving these revolutions forward, and we're going to do it.
Of course, there's an exception to all of this, and the West has pretty much turned a blind eye to it. It's Bahrain, where the Saudis and the Qataris are not really talking about it much, are they, Ali?
No, despite the fact that there is bad blood between the Qatari ruling family and the Bahraini ruling family. I mean, a few hundred years, actually, of bad blood. However, the Qatari government has been steadfast with their neighbors in cracking down on their people.
Why? Because it's Sunnis versus Shias?
It's not about that. It's about, I think, it's about more. Yes, the Qatari government is a sectarian government. I can confirm that. But at the same time, it is about power. If you lose Bahrain to a public or a popular revolution, Qatar could be next. Let's remember, there is a famous Qatari poet by the name of Muhammad ibn Dhib, who is in jail now for over a year, because he wrote a poem, a Bedouin poem about revolution. So he's been behind bars all of this time. Nobody knows about him. He has not been allowed to speak or to have a fair trial. And that is directly, imagine this Qatar that supports the revolution in the Arab Spring, so-called, in Syria and Libya, is holding one man for years because he wrote a poem calling for revolution, not even in his country, just about revolution. So this is a country that's not really pro-democracy. Even if they have election, it's going to be very, very much a sham election, because the ruling family is a dictatorship that controls every single element of the Qatari society. There is not a single political party. There is not a single civic society in that country. So you are dealing with a country that is very much run by one man, who is the Emir, and his cousin, Mr. Hamad bin Jassim.
But there is, again, that this Sunni-Shia divide, and in the past, at least up till very recently, Qatar was often a facilitator to help calm things down between Saudi Arabia on the one side and Iran on the other.
You're right to point out that problem that way. Just coming back to the soccer issue. two kind of people buy soccer clubs: Russian tycoons to gain name recognition, and Qatar to earn moral support. And why?
French people also buy soccer
Also,
clubs.
but why? Because people should remember that Qatar is sitting on one of the most important gas fields that it doesn't own entirely. Half of that gas field belongs to Iran out of all countries. Now, you can understand why the Qataris feel compelled to establish good, positive relations with other countries around the world, because we knew and we discovered this evening the tough relations they have with the Saudis. Now imagine they're sharing their oil, their gas wealth with the Iranians. They sure need moral support. And you're right, in that area of the world, Bahrain was mentioned. Bahrain, you're talking about a country where 75% of the entire population are Shia, who are being crushed by a Sunni minority. In Qatar, you're talking about a country that is, with Saudi Arabia, the only two Wahhabi schools of thought in the entire Arabian Peninsula, which is the most radical version of Islam. And they are in competition with the Saudis, they're in competition with the Emiratis, they're in competition with everyone around town. Times are difficult for them. And in today's world, you sure need to have moral support, especially when you're talking about a country that is that small in such a tough neighborhood.
David Roberts, once again, it's the question I put earlier to Elizabeth, but I'll put it to you. Do you sometimes wonder, with everything that's going on, both with the uprisings in the countries we mentioned, and also the problems, the tensions between Iran, Israel, and the West, that Qatar, do you ever wonder if it's sometimes in over its head with its implication in so many of the affairs of the region?
Quite possibly. I mean, obviously enough, as Elizabeth mentioned, the key change was with Libya, when they changed from being a neutral arbiter, a neutral mediator of affairs, to one that was clearly supporting one side and not the other. I mean, at the time, there were concerns for Qatari citizens around Europe in terms of Gaddafi and some kind of retaliatory, spiteful kind of attack, something like that. So that is one sort of concern. And again, with Qatar being such a small state. It's you know, in the government departments here, they're relatively young. Let's not forget, Qatar has only been independent since 1971, and you know, its bureaucracy is just growing. And so, you know, once you engage in these actions, it's difficult to have the bureaucratic sort of machine behind it that needs to undertake all the necessary rigorous checks and security concerns, to look at the security concerns. So absolutely, it's a concern. Just very briefly on Bahrain.
Very briefly, because we're out of time.
Sure, if the Qataris had a choice, I'm pretty sure they would like to effect some kind of mediation there. But at the same time, like all states, they're bounded by the basic realities of geopolitics. Saudi Arabia wouldn't let them act, and Saudi Arabia are absolutely huge and right next door to them. I think that's a key problem.
And we did invite the Qatari embassy to join us for this discussion. Hopefully they'll come and they'll agree to come next time. I want to thank you, David Roberts, for being with us. I want to thank Elizabeth Dickinson for joining us from Abu Dhabi, and here in the studio, Ardavan Amir Aslani and Ali Ahmed. Thank you for being with us, and thank you for joining us here in the France 24 debate. Stay with us. Business is next. It's with Tom Burgess-Watson.